In the hills, far from the busy world, there was a village called Koma. It was a quiet village where people lived peaceful lives. The villagers worked together to grow their crops, gather water from the nearby stream, and meet up in the evenings to tell stories. Everyone knew each other in Koma, and news spread quickly. But recently something strange had begun to happen, and fear was starting to take over the village. For several months now, young women from Koma had been found dead. No one knew what was killing them, but there was one thing that was always the same. The women's left breasts were gone, as if someone had taken them in the night. And when they were found, their bodies were pale, almost white, as though all their blood had been taken from them. The people in the village were scared, but they couldn't explain what was happening. No one had seen any wild animals in the area, so they couldn't understand why this was happening only to the young women. The strange thing was that no one heard screams or saw signs of struggle. The bodies were always found quietly, in places where no one had been around to witness what happened. This made the villagers even more afraid. They didn't know who or what was behind these deaths, and that made everything feel more mysterious and terrifying. The village chief knew something had to be done. He sent out hunters into the forest, hoping to find the creature or animal that could be causing these deaths. The hunters searched everywhere, but they found nothing. No signs of any animal, no clues, nothing that could explain the deaths. But still the killings continued. The fear in the village only grew stronger. Mothers in Koma began warning their daughters not to go outside at night, and some even said it was not safe during the day. People became more cautious, more nervous. The village, once full of laughter, and life now felt quiet and uncertain. Trust was fading. The fear was everywhere, but there was one man in the village who didn't seem to care about all the fear. His name was Duro, and he was known for his charm with women. Every woman in Koma knew who the finest man in the village was, and they would all say the same thing. It was Duro. He was tall and strong, his muscles showing from the hard work he did each day. His skin was smooth and dark, and his eyes always seemed to sparkle with a secret that no one else knew. His smile alone was enough to make any woman feel weak. Duro had a special way of making women feel good about themselves. Whenever he walked through the village, women would giggle and blush, hoping he would notice them. And when he did, it felt like the sun was shining just for them. The way he looked at them made them feel special, and they couldn't help but feel drawn to him. Duro didn't just rely on his good looks. It was the way he talked to women, the way he moved, the way he made every woman feel like the most important person in the world. He had this charm, this power over people, especially the women in Koma. His presence was enough to make them forget their fears, even in the midst of the strange deaths that had been happening. He was like a magnet, pulling them in without them, even realizing it. He was also very confident, and he knew it. Duro walked around the village with his head held high, his eyes always searching for his next target. He had a reputation. Everywhere he went, the women of Koma couldn't take their eyes off him. Whether they were at the well, the market, or the farms, if Duro was nearby, they were looking at him. They couldn't help it, and it wasn't just his handsome face that attracted them. It was the way he carried himself, the way he moved, and the way he made them feel. But Duro had a dangerous secret. He didn't care about the fear in the village, he didn't worry about the deaths. He went on with his life as if nothing was wrong. Duro knew he was handsome, and he used it to his advantage. He walked around the village confidently, looking for his next catch. The women were always drawn to him no matter what was happening in the village, and Duro knew exactly how to use that. He would spend time talking to the women, making them feel special. He would take his time drawing them in, making them trust him. And once he had them longing for him, he would take them away from the village out to a secluded spot on the edge of Koma. It was quiet there, far from the eyes of the villagers, and it was under the glow of the moon that Duro would work his magic. He was gentle with them, making them feel like they were the only woman in the world. But as the night grew darker, something strange would always happen. Duro would ask the same question each time. Do you know the difference between a man's strength and a two-headed snake? The women would laugh, thinking he was just making a joke. Maybe he was comparing himself to a powerful snake, they thought. But before they could answer, something strange would happen. The air would grow cold, and the room would seem to spin. They would feel uneasy, as if something was about to happen. And that's when it did. A dark, dangerous snake would slither out from Duro's clothing. The snake had two heads, and it moved quickly, wrapping itself around the woman's body. Before they could scream, one of the snake's heads would rip off their left breast, while the other sucked the blood from the wound, making the woman's body turn white. The snake would then retreat back into Duro's clothes, and he would stand over the lifeless body of the woman. By morning, the body would be found, cold and pale, with the left breast missing. The villagers would gather around, wondering what kind of creature could do such a thing. No one suspected Duro, the charming man they all trusted, the man who had everyone's heart. As each woman died, the fear in the village grew stronger, but Duro didn't change. He continued his life as if nothing was happening. The women still smiled at him and blushed when he passed by, completely unaware of the danger he brought with him. The days passed, and the fear in Koma continued to grow. Each time a woman was found dead, the villagers whispered in fear. It was the same thing every time. Their left breast was gone, and their bodies were pale, drained of life. But no one knew who was behind it. The village was gripped by terror, and no one felt safe anymore. Chief Moku, the leader of Koma, tried his best to keep the villagers calm. He spoke to them in a soothing voice, telling them not to be afraid, to trust in the village's strength. But even he couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one could figure out what it was. The mystery continued to haunt them. The latest victim was Urma, a young woman who was the only child of a widow in the village. Her mother had loved her more than anything. When she saw her daughter's lifeless body lying in the village square, her heart broke into pieces. She cried out, tears flowing freely, as the pain of losing her only child crushed her. There was no way to bring Urma back. The mother, lost in her grief, walked away from the village, heading towards the river that lay forgotten on the outskirts of Koma. The river had been there for as long as anyone could remember. It was said to be a place where people went to seek the wisdom of the river goddess. The mother laid herself down at the river's edge, her heart heavy with sorrow, and cried out for justice. She cried to the river goddess for vengeance, asking for someone to pay for the life of her beloved daughter. She wept until the sun had set, her cries echoing through the valley. By the time she returned home, it was dark, and her eyes were swollen from hours of crying. Despite the prayers and offerings made by the village's chief priest, there was no answer. The goddess remained silent, and the killings continued. It was as if the village had been cursed, and nothing could stop the terror that had taken over their lives. But then one day a strange woman arrived in Koma. Her name was Omalicha, and she was different from any other woman in the village. Omalicha was tall, graceful, and her skin shimmered like polished wood in the sunlight. She carried herself with confidence, walking through the village as if she was in control of everything around her. She wasn't like the others. Her beauty wasn't just in her face or body. It was in the way she moved, the way she carried herself with such calm assurance. Omalicha had come to visit her aunt, who lived on the edge of the village. As soon as she arrived, Duro's attention was immediately drawn to her. He had seen many women come and go, but Omalicha was different. When he first saw her at the village well, he was struck by her calmness. While all the other women giggled, blushed and stared at him when he walked by, Omalicha did none of those things. She didn't smile at him, nor did she even glance his way. Instead, she looked past him, her face serene and calm, as if she was completely uninterested in him. This intrigued Duro. He was used to women fawning over him, used to being the center of attention wherever he went. But Omalicha was different. Her indifference felt like a challenge, and Duro never turned down a challenge. He had always been able to win over any woman he wanted, and he wasn't about to let Omalicha be the first to resist him. From that moment on, he made up his mind. He would have her, no matter what it took. Duro began to watch Omalicha closely. He noticed that she was always polite to people but never too friendly. She was kind but distant, never allowing anyone to get too close. This only made Duro want her more. He wasn't just interested in her beauty. He was fascinated by her strength, her mystery. The more he watched her, the more obsessed he became. He had to have her, and he couldn't stand the thought of anyone else getting her attention. He tried to approach her several times, but each time she kept her distance. She was always polite, but never gave him more than a simple answer. Duro wasn't used to this. Women usually responded to him immediately, but Omalicha was different. She made him work for it, and that only made him want her more. He didn't like being ignored, and Omalicha's calmness, her indifference, made him feel like he had to win her over. One afternoon, Duro saw his chance. Omalicha was at the river, filling her water pot, and there were fewer people around. Duro approached her with his usual confident smile, his deep voice smooth like honey. "Let me help you carry that," he said, offering to take the heavy pot from her. Omalicha glanced at him briefly, her expression unchanged. She didn't smile, didn't look impressed by his charms. She simply nodded and stepped back. "If you insist," she said calmly. "You want to assist me, then fine." Her voice was steady, and Duro could feel his victory slipping away. He expected her to laugh, to blush, but she did none of those things. She was calm, unaffected. Duro picked up the water pot and placed it on his head, showing off his strength as they walked together. He tried to make small talk, but Omalicha remained quiet, only answering his questions politely. This wasn't what Duro was used to. He was used to women engaging with him, laughing at his jokes and flirting with him. But Omalicha didn't seem interested in any of that. It only made him more determined. He told himself that it was just a matter of time before she would fall for him like the others. All the women eventually did. After that day at the river, Duro couldn't stop thinking about Omalicha. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. Most women in Koma would have melted under his smile, but Omalicha didn't. She was different, and that made her even more desirable to him. The more she resisted him, the more he wanted her. It was frustrating, but it only made him more obsessed. Duro had never felt this way before, and he didn't like it. He was used to being in control, used to getting whatever he wanted, and he wouldn't let Omalicha slip away so easily. Day after day, he watched her from a distance. He saw her when she fetched water, when she walked to the market, and when she visited her aunt's farm just outside the village. He knew that Omalicha often helped her aunt with the yams and vegetables she grew there. So one evening, as the sun began to set and cast a warm orange glow over the fields, Duro waited. He leaned against a tree, his arms crossed, watching the path that led to the farm. Finally, he saw her walking towards him. She was carrying a basket of yams on her head, her posture straight, her expression calm as always. Duro stepped forward, blocking her path. "Omalicha," he said, his voice deep and smooth. "You've been avoiding me." Omalicha raised an eyebrow, looking up at him without breaking her calm expression. "I have been busy. I've been doing no such thing," she replied, her voice steady. Duro felt his temper flare. He wasn't used to being brushed off like this. He wasn't used to women acting like he didn't matter. "You're always so serious," he said, taking a step closer. "Why don't you let me walk with you? We could get to know each other better." For a moment, Duro thought she might agree, but instead, Omalicha shook her head. "I'm not interested, Duro," she said simply, and with that she stepped around him and continued on her way. Duro stood there stunned. He was shocked, angry, and more than anything, determined. No one had ever said no to him like this before. His pride was hurt, but more than that, he couldn't let Omalicha go. She would be his no matter what it took. As Omalicha walked away, Duro's eyes darkened. He made a promise to himself right then and there. He would have her, and he would make her want him. For weeks, Duro had been playing a dangerous game. He had watched Omalicha closely, studied her every move, trying to figure out how to win her over. He had never met a woman who could resist him, and now he was obsessed with making Omalicha his. No matter how much she ignored him or pushed him away, Duro was determined to break through her calm exterior. He had always been able to charm anyone he wanted. No woman had ever said no to him before, and he wasn't going to let Omalicha be the first. But this time he knew he had to change his strategy. He had been showering her with attention, and it wasn't working. She seemed untouched by his usual tricks, so Duro decided to play the long game. He pulled back. He stopped following her around, stopped trying to charm her with sweet words and flirtatious smiles. He knew that if he gave her space, She might start wondering why he wasn't pursuing her anymore. Maybe, just maybe, it would make her come to him. As the days passed, Omalicha started to notice the change. She had expected Duro to keep trying, to keep pursuing her, but instead he seemed distant, almost uninterested. At first she couldn't quite understand what had happened. But as she observed him from a distance, she began to wonder if there was more to him than the confident, charming man who had been chasing her so relentlessly before. One evening, Duro was sitting outside his hut, sharpening his knife when Omalicha walked by. She looked at him, and this time there was no anger or suspicion in her gaze. Instead, there was curiosity. She paused and spoke to him for the first time in days. "You've been quiet lately," she remarked, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. Duro looked up at her, offering a simple nod. His expression remained neutral, but inside he was pleased. This was exactly what he wanted. He kept his responses short, deliberately keeping her at a distance. He wanted her to see that he wasn't chasing her anymore. He was playing the part of the uninterested man, and he could tell it was working. After a few moments of silence, Duro spoke. "Would you like to take a walk with me?" he asked, his voice calm and gentle. Omalicha studied him for a moment, as if weighing the offer. Then, to his delight, she agreed. They walked together, and as they did, Duro kept the conversation light. He spoke casually, trying to make her feel comfortable. But more importantly, he wanted her to see a side of him that she hadn't seen before. He wasn't just the charming man who always got his way. He was more than that, and he was determined to show her. Over time, Omalicha seemed to soften. Her responses became less guarded, and she no longer looked at him with suspicion. She began to speak more freely, and Duro could feel her walls coming down. He knew that she was still cautious, still not entirely trusting him, but he could see that he was getting closer. One evening, Duro invited Omalicha to his hut on the outskirts of the village. He told her they could spend a quiet evening together, away from the eyes of the villagers. She agreed, her voice now less stiff, more relaxed. The two of them walked to his hut as the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light over the land. Inside the hut, Duro had set the mood. The soft glow of an oil lamp flickered in the corner, casting shadows on the walls. He offered Omalicha a seat and poured them both some palm wine, his movements calm and smooth. He could see that she was no longer on edge, no longer watching him so closely. She was beginning to trust him, and that gave him a sense of victory. Omalicha took a sip of the palm wine, her eyes watching Duro. But this time, there was no judgment in her gaze. She wasn't analyzing him, trying to figure him out. Instead, she seemed to be at ease. Duro's heart swelled with pride, and he decided it was time. He moved closer, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. "Omalicha," he said softly, his voice low and seductive. "I've been thinking about you. You are different from the others. You're strong. You're independent. I admire that." Omalicha smiled faintly, but there was something in her expression that told Duro he was getting through to her. She was still calm, but he could see the effect his words were having. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping even lower. "Do you know the difference between a man's strength and a two-headed snake?" Omalicha raised an eyebrow, confused by his question. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Duro clapped his hands 3 times. The sound echoed in the small room, and Omalicha shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, and a strange chill filled the space. From the shadows, a dark shape began to move. Omalicha's eyes widened in fear as she saw the two-headed snake slither out from Duro's trousers. Its cold, smooth scales glistened in the dim light, and it coiled around her, preparing to strike. But something was different this time. Omalicha didn't scream. She didn't panic like the other women had. Instead, she raised her hands, and Duro felt something strange. It was as if his heart had been filled with water. He froze, his eyes wide in shock. The snake, which had been poised to attack, hesitated. It stopped in its tracks, confused, its eyes now focused on Omalicha. "Who are you?" Duro whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Omalicha's eyes opened, glowing with a bright light. For the first time, Duro saw something in her eyes that he had never expected. Power. The snake, which had always been under his control, turned away from Omalicha and slithered back toward him. Duro stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. Fear flashed across his face as the snake coiled around his legs. He gasped, "Who are you? How did you do that?" Omalicha's face was calm, her expression unreadable. "You are not the only one who knows about snakes," she said, her voice cold and steady. "It's time you paid for what you've done." Before Duro could react, the snake struck. Its fangs sank into his neck and the venom spread quickly through his body. Duro's body convulsed, his breath shallow as the venom paralyzed him. The life drained out of him slowly and he collapsed, his eyes wide with fear. Omalicha stood over him, her expression cold and impassive. She had come for justice, and she had delivered it. She lifted Duro's lifeless body and carried it to the village square. By morning, the village was in shock. The people of Koma gathered around Duro's body, their faces filled with disbelief. The man they had trusted, the man they had all admired, was dead. Beside him lay the two-headed snake, its deadly secret exposed for all to see. Omalicha stood before the villagers, her voice steady as she spoke. "I am not who you think I am," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd. "I am the river goddess. I heard the cries of the widow whose daughter was murdered by this man. I came to bring justice. Duro was the cause of all the deaths in this village. He used dark magic to seduce and kill women." The villagers were stunned. They had never suspected Duro, the man who had been so charming, so perfect in their eyes. They had trusted him, and now they realized that he had been the source of their pain. Some of the women who had once giggled and blushed in his presence now stood in shock, their faces pale with disbelief. They had almost become victims of his charm. Omalicha continued, "You were blinded by his appearance, by his charm. You never saw the monster he really was." The villagers stood in silence, the weight of her words sinking in. Duro's reign of terror was over. The village was free from the darkness that had haunted them for so long. The women could walk freely again, and peace began to return to Koma. Years passed, and the story of Duro's dark magic became a legend in Koma. Mothers would tell their daughters the tale, warning them not to fall for a man's charm without knowing his true heart. The story of Duro reminded the villagers that not everything beautiful is good, and sometimes danger hides behind the sweetest smile. The river where Omalicha had come from became a place of reverence. The villagers honored her for bringing justice to the land. And as for Duro, his name was forgotten. Buried in the dust of history, he was remembered only as a warning to those who might be tempted to deceive others with charm and deceit. The story teaches us that appearances can be deceiving. A charming smile or a handsome face may hide dark intentions, and not everyone who seems good has your best interests at heart. True strength comes from within, and justice will eventually prevail, even when hidden for a long time. If you learned something from this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Stay safe, be cautious, and always look beyond the surface.